we're going to continue looking at this bright spot of incubators, because many people believe that it's the incubators and the startup companies that live within them that are actually going to bring the life science industry into its growth cycle again. And this is a cyclical industry. This happens all the time, every 10 to 15 years. So this is not something that is going to stymie the growth of this. The life science industry will continue, but it's just in one of its cycles right now. So right now we have a panel of national experts on the incubation markets across the country, not just in Philly. Matt Gardner, who is the managing director of CBRE, just completed the first national survey of incubators across the country, and he found some really interesting data that he's going to share with you. And then we have two speakers, Danielle Bogdanovich from BioLabs. She is the Vice President of Business Operations and Strategy, and Peter Kramer, the Vice President and Market Executive for Wexford Science and Technology. Welcome.
All right, good afternoon. I'm told, Nancy, that you want us to go for 110 minutes to make sure no one gets lunch equally. Is that right? Good. I'm going to stay here, guys. You okay with that? Danielle and Pete? Okay. Our job is to be as brief as we can, but to pick up from Lou Cass's program. It's nice to see Lou here. I can't see quite through the lights where he went. Great panel that Lou led there, representing, I think, a great big chunk of the startup ecosystem. And we're going to pick up from that and use that opportunity to jump off and look at, as the program says, the comparison of Philly to other emerging markets. I don't think of Philly as an emerging market, but we're joined by two what you could label multi-site operators of these pieces of the glue in the ecosystem. And so I'm going to ask each of them, I'll start with Danielle, to introduce themselves and to give you a sort of a glimpse into the markets where they have presence. So Danielle, can you go first?
Great, sure. Hi everybody, Danielle Bogdanowicz. I work with BioLabs. As you know, Melina Blees is our site head for the BioLabs Philadelphia location. She did a great job sharing what we do and what our mission is. But BioLabs is a global network of co-working wet lab spaces for early stage biotech companies. We have 11 locations and growing in the US right now. In sort of many of your standard biotech markets, Boston, San Diego, et cetera, as well as emerging markets where we partner with universities, research institutes, philanthropic groups, pharma companies to help to build innovation ecosystems. A lot of what we also add is to provide access to a global network of resources for our startups across the globe. Melina mentioned the Investor Day program that we've run came out of COVID and the challenging times of fundraising for startups is a global challenge that still exists today. So that campaign, we do those events here in Philly as well as on the West Coast in San Diego, in Boston, as well as in Europe. We host one in Paris and also in Heidelberg every year. So just to provide attention to the companies in our portfolio as well as the companies in the markets where our sites are located, to give them access to potential strategic partners at pharma companies, VCs, et cetera. So happy to be here today and chat about those markets.
And Pete, your platform was very early in the sort of academic ecosystem partnership sort of design. So if you could describe that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. So hi, everybody. Pete Kramer, Vice President Development at Wexford Science and Technology. I'm also the market executive locally here in Philadelphia at our project U City Square. Like Matt said, we've been in this space for a long time. Just a little bit about Wexford. We've been in business for 18 plus years. And our focus is really with developing commercial research buildings and mixed-use communities in partnership with universities and top-tier research institutes around the country. So we've been doing it for a long time. We're probably in 10 of the top life science markets across the country. Developed around 10 million square feet, just to give you sort of a sense of scale. And we, what's unique about us is a lot of our projects are not in kind of the core life science markets. We are in a number of I don't even know if they're called emerging markets. They are very small markets that are anchored by a top-tier university. Great example of that is, like Wake Forest University is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Who would have thought that's a place to develop an ecosystem around life sciences? But we've been able to do it, and I think a lot of that is the strength and the partnership with that academic medical center. So happy to talk about it more, but like Danielle, we have sort of a national footprint in this space.
So Pete, I want to highlight, obviously we could talk about a whole bunch of examples. You're in places like Sacramento and Phoenix, anchored with their major research institutions. We work for you in one market in Charlotte, and the reason I want to point that out is a fearless investment by you and your team in a market where there hasn't been any lab to speak of so far. So real, true emerging in the sense that it's going from basically zero lab to a very complex partnership which you're leading on behalf of a whole set of global investors. Could you highlight what that risk is like and how you've ended up leading that with such complicated stakeholders? Yeah, that's a great example, Matt, and I think really exciting project if you get a chance to visit it in Charlotte. It's wrapping up now. It's called the Pearl, and it's in the Charlotte metro. Everyone thinks of North Carolina, they think of Research Triangle Park, which is a hotbed for life sciences. They don't think of Charlotte. When you think of Charlotte, you think of banking. But what was really unique about that project and why we got excited is because Atrium Health, one of the largest health systems in the country, they went to Wake Forest and they said, hey, we want to put a medical school in Charlotte, largest metro in the country that didn't have a medical school. And by the way, Wake already had a medical school. So they said, hey, could you kind of copy and paste what you guys did in Winston-Salem, bring it to Charlotte, and be our partner. And so that partnership was really exciting to us. And that level of investment and commitment that both of those institutions were going to put into this project got us comfortable with the risk and got us comfortable with the underwriting. So it absolutely, in these markets where there are no market, it starts with the university. And I think they've been kind of a critical anchor. And we feel, though, that with those anchors there, it will attract industry, and it already has. ERCAD is a medical surgical kind of training center around the country based in France. They've got a couple different locations, and we went with Atrium to France to recruit them to open their first North American site in the Pearl. So great example of sort of leveraging those partnerships to attract industry to these knowledge communities. So Nancy, I would say we'll take questions anytime. We don't mind being interrupted if you want to have the mic roving around. We'd be happy to field anytime. I'm going to keep going, though, and so there I've cheated a little bit by pointing out a truly nascent market. How many of you were at the program with Philly Builds Bio last year? How many of you can remember my unforgettable Al Pacino impersonation? Right? So I'm not going to do that. This year I'm going to get Mike Myers up here on stage and do Wayne and Garth's Wayback Machine. Okay, I'm going to go way back. Charlotte's life sciences ecosystem is 5 minutes old. My bias is that Philly's life sciences ecosystem is 150 years old. Pharma was born here 150 years ago. There are kind of two ecosystems here. There's a suburban pharma campus that's tried and true and has been here forever, and the downtown core that's kind of built around University City and Navy Yard and other things that are relatively newer, but still a much longer legacy. In fact, our core thesis at CB is that there are 7 big biotech clusters that have a 5-decade tenure and are established, and Philly is one of those. And so I think I'm foreshadowing Danielle, but can you talk about your perspective on how Philly compares to the other markets that you're in and how you view emerging as support for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like we've mentioned, we too are in some very nascent markets, and a lot of, I think what differentiates Philly from what we would define as emerging or nascent is that all the elements for a successful biotech are here. I think we talked a lot about connections today. We can, of course, continue to think about ways to build connections between all those different groups, but the research dollars are here, the strong universities and research institutes are here, the attention from VC is here and growing. There is pharma nearby. I know there's always that, I think something we see in Boston, I'm based in Boston, we see all the time is pharma deciding just how close they need to be to the city, to the innovation, to the early talent. We are seeing pharma start to move back into Kendall and downtown to have direct access to those folks. So, yes, it's a little bit further away here, but there are lots of pharma strategics and those opportunities for collaboration here in Philly as well. So yeah, I think again, events like this and having all the key groups in the room to continue to build on those connections is what I think differentiates Philly more from what you might call an emerging or a nascent market, where we are much more focused on bringing new resources to those communities. The resources are here in Philly.
Pete, do you have a sort of a foundational view of Philly versus other?
Yeah, Philly's our best market. I mean, I'll say that pretty simply. We founded the company here. The idea for the company was really founded here back in early 2000s. We kind of got our start and built some of the first purpose-built kind of commercial lab buildings in the city. There just wasn't any product, to your point, Matt. Even though there were all these kind of foundational ingredients around it, there wasn't product for companies to go to. And to see how far it's come has been really exciting. And you mentioned the suburbs, Danielle. I think that's another differentiator for Philly, is that legacy pharma talent. I think a lot of the clients we've seen have ties back to that pharma. They worked at Merck for 20 years, and they want to do something different. They want to do a startup, and that's been really exciting to kind of see. And you can see how having kind of the mix of sort of more experienced talent coupled with the 100-degree granting universities in the area makes for, I think, a really positive mix for Philadelphia and for the future.
Danielle, you provide a lot of sort of additional support to startups that come into the biolabs orbit. Could you talk a little bit about things like mentoring and how that pool of management talent here makes some of those things a little bit easier to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to the point we just made about pharma and the more senior folks who are local to the community here, in other locations you have maybe the scientific talent because there are those research universities and research institutes, but not that direct industry experience that's accessible locally. And so what we try to do is provide access to resources. Part of that's through our pharma collaborations. We do have global pharma partners that we leverage across our sites. I think, again, we see these folks at these events all the time in Philly, which is great, as opposed to having to either virtually connect folks with our pharma partners elsewhere in the US or globally. And then same for, and then in addition to that, we'll do online sort of mentor and investor connect type programming that, again, I think having the local resources where folks can meet face-to-face and build these longer-term relationships, there's something to be said for that over these virtual connections. COVID has taught us that virtual events can be beneficial and we can make new connections with folks who are further away, but I think, the fact that the pharma strategics are close by and at events where you can just chat and get to know folks is
Pete, I'm going to go slightly over time here and ask you to do a little bit of a commercial for us. Your counterparts in a few other markets are piloting a new program, your Connect Labs effort, which I think started at Aggie Square, if that was the first program to run a Connect. So can you describe that a little bit? And I'll just ask you to include in the thought why it's so important to be flexible with startups which have such a high failure rate and maybe aren't the greatest at paying rent at the beginning.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks, Matt, for the commercial. Always happy to do a plug. But yes, so I think we've valued the incubator space, and the term incubator gets thrown around. Service lab is another term that I hear often. But for small companies, space for small companies that's turnkey, that has services typically, I think we put a high value on that in all of our markets for a long time now. And we've done it a couple different ways. So we've had some relationships with first class operators like biolabs or CIC labs in different markets. Recently, we've emerged in this new product called Connect Labs that we're doing sort of in-house in certain markets that make sense. And I think especially in some of these markets that there are no lab space and that there may need to be a model that's not the same as the model in Philadelphia. One is size. That's a thing we flex. So typically, our Connect Labs product is about a floor. It's 30,000 square feet. It has a level of service, but we customize that service level to the market. And we also customize, I would say, the level of, or the ratio of sort of wet to dry to assembly, depending on the strengths of that institution and depending on the types of companies that are coming out of that institution. Great example, we're looking at a project in Michigan with University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor's not probably on your list yet. But that's a project that, they have a strong background in biomedical sciences, but they also have a really strong background in robotics and automated vehicles. And so I think we're giving a lot of thought to what's the right mix for that market if we are successful in winning that project. So I think Connect Labs is a new thing. We've got it in, we'll have it in probably 3 different sites by the end of 2025, which is really exciting. We're opening up a location in Baltimore, just down the street. And we're super excited to see how it kind of fits into the ecosystems.
Okay, I'm going to go back to my go-to, Mike Myers. In a nutshell, Austin Powers, this is me in a nutshell. If I had to ask you in a nutshell what market you compare Philly to globally for its combination of biotech and pharma, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Danielle, can you pick one that Philly compares most to? Totally unfair question.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think, honestly, I really think it's hard to compare to anything. I certainly wouldn't compare it to any other emerging ecosystem. I do think, I know most growing biotech markets try to compare themselves to Boston. Like I say, those are the comparisons I can draw because I'm based in Boston. But I think from at least the pharma side of things, that is the closest comparator that I have. We see in San Diego as well, there is some pharma there. Supporting the very therapeutics-focused type of companies that are there. So I would say, yeah, maybe San Diego, Philly, Boston, they all have that, sort of mass population of pharma, and then also that growing, population of early-stage companies, and hopefully, yeah, in all those ecosystems, those 2 groups continue to figure out how to work better together.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're always looking up to our friends in Boston and Cambridge and sort of making the University City, Cambridge connection, and there's a ton of similarities you can draw there. I will say Seattle's another one that just from a sort of statistical standpoint, we get compared to a lot. Geographically, it's a little bit different, and I don't know if it has as much of the sort of legacy pharma in the suburbs, but I think from a sort of standing in probably your lists, Matt, I always sort of see that comparison. Yeah. It has strong investment, it has space available, it has a number of emerging companies, it has some strong institutional partners, so I think Seattle's another one.
I'm going to give you a contrast that will be especially useful for you during baseball's playoffs. I think of Philly as the anti-San Diego, and here's culturally why. San Diego came up from pure biotech, and Philly was pharma, and they filled in for the other that they were missing. So you're very much the anti-San Diego. And if you need that to hate the Padres more, I encourage you to use that as you need to. Nancy, I'll turn back to you. Would you join me, please, in thanking our panel?
Thank you.